Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at the chemical reaction known as anaerobic respiration. I suggest strongly that you review my video B9.1 on aerobic respiration before you continue to watch this video. In that video I had started with a demonstration of opening and closing your hand once raised in the air so that we could compare the processes of aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration when your hand has been in the air for a while and it is difficult to open and close your fist because of a lack of oxygen flowing up against gravity to those muscle cells. So what exactly is anaerobic respiration? Well, anaerobic respiration can occur both in animals and in yeast and in plants. So it's important that we understand that there are different equations for animals and yeast and plants. So on this slide I have the anaerobic respiration equation that occurs in animals. Now it's important to remember that aerobic respiration is respiration that uses oxygen, and anaerobic respiration occurs when there is not enough oxygen available. So when you look at the word equation here, you'll notice it's just glucose. There's no oxygen there. Glucose breaks down to give 2 molecules of lactic acid. And of course we don't include the energy because that's not a chemical, but energy is released. Only there is less energy released in anaerobic respiration compared to aerobic respiration. It's all important also to note that the lactic acid that is produced is a poison that causes pain and cramp in muscle cells and muscle tissue. So what exactly is this muscle fatigue then? So when we use muscles for a long time, we can make them become tired or fatigued. And this happens when the muscles contract less efficiently and energy is wasted. One of the causes of this muscle fatigue is the buildup of lactic acid due to anaerobic respiration. Another thing to consider is this. You can see both here and here we have a top athlete and we have somebody who is less fit, and both of them, when they stop exercising, have to breathe incredibly hard and heavily for quite some time after they've finished their exercising. Now why is that? Well, this is known as oxygen debt. The lactic acid produced in anaerobic respiration is a poison and it damages cells. It can cause painful cramps, so the lactic acid molecules therefore need to be broken down and made safe. And this occurs in the liver. So the lactic acid is transported to the liver in the blood and converted back into glucose in the liver, which can then be used again in aerobic respiration, or it can be stored as glycogen. However, to break down the lactic acid, this process requires oxygen. So the extra oxygen required to break down the lactic acid is known as your oxygen debt. So the more anaerobic respiration you do during exercise, the more heavily you're going to have to breathe when you finish the exercise in order to pay this oxygen debt and provide extra oxygen to break down the lactic acid you produced. This is the reason why you keep breathing heavily even after you have finished exercising. So let's now consider what happens in plant cells and yeast cells. Well, anaerobic respiration will also take place in plants and some microbial cells, for example yeast, in the presence of little or no oxygen. And examples of this include the fermentation occurring in yeast cells, or the anaerobic respiration that occurs in the roots of waterlogged plants, for example rice plants which are grown in rice paddies. So if we think about those plants for a little while, anaerobic respiration in plant cells produces ethanol as well as the waste gas carbon dioxide. Now ethanol is poisonous, and if anaerobic respiration goes on for too long, then the plant can die. Now this is very important if you have any plants at home. If you overwater those plants, then all the little air spaces in the soil which normally allow oxygen to diffuse into the root hair cells so they can carry out aerobic respiration, those air spaces in the soil will become waterlogged. So there'll be no air there and therefore no oxygen. So those root hair cells within the waterlogged soil will begin to carry out anaerobic respiration, and that means they're going to produce ethanol. And ethanol is poisonous if anaerobic respiration goes on too long, and your plant can die due to overwatering and the continued anaerobic respiration in the root cells that this creates. Now, one exception to this example is rice plants. Rice actually have a very high tolerance to ethanol in the roots, and they can survive in waterlogged soils. This is why rice is grown in rice paddies. And it's a fantastic adaptation that the rice plant has, because it means the farmers can grow the large amounts of rice in flooded field, safe in the knowledge that there will be very little competition from any weed plants, because they won't be able to survive in those conditions. Now, if we turn our attention back to this chemical process known as fermentation, fermentation is an example of anaerobic respiration that is very important economically. It occurs in yeast cells, and it's used in the brewing industry to produce alcoholic drinks such as beers and wines. So if we have a look at the equation for anaerobic respiration in plants and yeast, you can understand why all of this occurs. Glucose without oxygen, so just glucose is broken down to produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. Of course, there is some energy there, but we don't include that in the word equation because energy is not a chemical. So the equation for anaerobic respiration in plants or yeast is glucose gives ethanol plus carbon dioxide. So both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration can be shown in using these two example experiments you can see below. In the first experiment, we're looking at aerobic respiration. So there is plenty of air within this conical flask. The yeast cells have been given kept in a sugar solution, so they have plenty of glucose and, in this case, plenty of oxygen. So the glucose plus the oxygen will combine together to produce carbon dioxide and water, and energy will be released in the form of ATP. And you can see that the carbon dioxide that is produced carries on up and out of this conical flask through this delivery tube and into a test tube containing lime water, and the test tube turns cloudy. Now, the test for carbon dioxide is that lime water will turn cloudy if carbon dioxide is present. So that proves with aerobic respiration in yeast that carbon dioxide is produced. However, if we go on to look at the anaerobic setup, it's pretty much the same. We have our yeast cells in a sugar solution, but in this occasion we have a layer of liquid paraffin, which means that any oxygen in the air outside cannot enter the yeast cells and the sugar solution. Therefore, those yeast cells will be carrying out respiration without oxygen, so that's anaerobic respiration. Any gases produced are going to travel up and out through this delivery tube and into some lime water down here. And of course, that lime water is going to turn cloudy because anaerobic respiration in yeast also produces carbon dioxide. So we've proved that both aerobic and anaerobic respiration in yeast cells produces the carbon dioxide. I hope you've enjoyed watching this short video on anaerobic respiration. If you have, don't forget to comment below, let me know what you've learnt, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thank you very much for your time.